Good evening. I call this meeting to order at 6:19 p.m. Tonight we have present directors Teitler, DeFreitas, Ramirez, After, and myself, meaning we have a quorum. Thank you to our interpreter Astrid. Would you please share the interpretation instructions with our participants? And then we can turn on the interpretation function. Thank you. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our superintendent, Dr. Anna Cole.
Good evening. As many of you are aware of, we had a really difficult start to this week. We were alerted Monday morning of online threats to schools across Colorado and Texas, including specifically Glenwood Springs Middle School. Our release of communication to staff and families Monday morning was delayed because of the time it took us to learn about these threats, consult with partners, and it was also delayed due to our own internal systems. Our families received notification of the threats, our collaboration with police departments right at the same time drop-off was happening at most of our schools. Because of the limited information we had at that time, many families were put in a position where they felt they didn't have the appropriate information to make an informed decision as to whether they should send their children to school or not. For some schools, there was limited or no impact from this situation on their school day Monday or throughout this week. But for other schools, for some of our students, families, and staff, these have been 3 stressful, anxious, and uncertain days. We shared communication at the end of the day Monday that local police departments had invalidated the threat, and we shared additional resources for families if they were still concerned. Our communications overall, though, fell short of what students, staff, and families wanted and needed, and we are really sorry for that. Some of the complexities and issues were within our control and others were not. Regardless, we missed the mark, and we're sorry for the stress and concern that this caused for students, staff, and families. The threats, very similar to the ones we received, have been spread across the country. We have colleagues that we're hearing from in multiple other states that have received very similar types of threats online. And given what's happened in our schools in the last couple of weeks across the country in years, I think we're continually reminded that these times are unprecedented in terms of violence and threats of violence in our schools. And it's taken teamwork and collaboration and frankly, a lot of learning to navigate this context. We really want to take this moment in terms of updates to really reiterate that our commitment to safety remains our highest priority, and we'll continue to refine and strengthen all of the strategies we use to keep students, staff, and families safe at school. We're grateful, very grateful for the feedback staff and families have shared and for the helpful pushes and recommendations that we've received that we're integrating and debriefing and using to strengthen our process. We're incredibly grateful for the staff and families who continue to support students and are wrapping around them, and folks who are continuing to have honest conversations with students and help them build skills to address the tension and worry that this incident, as well as incidents across the country, have caused. We will continue to respond and prepare and revise and strengthen protocols and listen closely to stakeholders as we learn from you and your feedback and move forward. We know we missed the mark on Monday and we're sorry and we'll do better. So I wanted to address that first of all. And although it is only Wednesday, this incident wasn't the only thing on our radar this week. So I have a couple of other things to share. We do want to share our gratitude for all the folks who participated in a very busy night last night here at the district office, as it was the launch of our Family Advisory Council, our District Wellness Committee, and the District Accountability. They all met last night. So we're really grateful for all the folks who attended and facilitated and stepped up in new leadership positions across all of those councils. Want to encourage families to join those groups. They'll meet again, those 3 in particular, Family Advisory Council, District Wellness Committee, and District Accountability Committee, again, October 8th. And we'll have more information in all of our regular channels about those meetings. Additionally, Monday, the Colorado Association of School Boards brought state and federal legislators to the Roaring Fork Valley. We hosted nearly 25 state and federal legislators and members of their team and board members from across the state of Colorado, and some teachers from some of the unions, especially in the Front Range. Really grateful for Director Ramirez for facilitating this tour and bringing that here to really spotlight the work in the Roaring Fork schools. And we were all, I think everyone who got to participate in the day was inspired by the Roaring Fork School District teams who rallied to host and to share and frankly, to shine. At the end of the day, I had legislators share with me all sorts of things throughout the day, but some of the things that they shared about the classrooms they went into at Glenwood Springs Elementary School, the words they used to describe the students at GSES were calm, joyful, and proud. And so just really wanted to lift up the work of our students and staff on Monday to welcome legislators. And then finally, just want the board and community to know that this year we are launching a pilot project. And last week, some of our Roaring Fork School District Hope Center providers, counselors from some of our schools in Glenwood, GSES, GSHS, and family liaisons began 3 days of training with an evidence-based program called STRONG, which stands for Supporting Transition Resilience of Newcomer Groups. And it's an evidence-informed school-based intervention for newly immigrated refugee and immigrant youth, kindergarten through 12th grade, to support their transition to a new school and community. So our teams are getting trained up on this, this intervention for newcomer students in our schools. And the goals of this program are to build resilience, to increase social support and connections, to enhance students' positive sense of identity, to develop effective coping strategies, and to cultivate problem-solving and goal-setting skills. So really grateful for the innovation and leadership of our Family Resource Center, our Hope Center partners, and our school counselors to bring this program into a few schools this year to pilot, and then we'll learn from the program and look to expand it if we see it promising. So just wanted the board to know that that work has begun. And those are the updates for this evening.
Thank you. The next business in order is the superintendent report and presentation, including the following topics to be covered by Chief Park: preliminary performance frameworks, Access 2024 results, CMAS Spring 2024 results, and PSAT10 and SAT Spring 2024 results.
Good evening. Good evening, board directors. I'm excited to share a little bit of the headlines of some key data and outcomes here. And as you know, our priority 2 of our 5-year strategic plan is on rigorous learning for all, specifically to ensure that all of our students have access to high quality, rigorous curricula and instruction, and to improve the equitable outcomes for our student subgroups. So I'll be sharing a few of the highlights from our school and district performance frameworks, our CMAS achievement and growth, and PSAT SAT achievement and growth. So first here, we've recently received our district and school performance frameworks. Colorado Department of Education is responsible for accrediting districts, and then we as districts are responsible for accrediting our schools. The areas of ratings do include academic achievement and growth for as measured by CMAS, ELA, math, and science, and then PSAT, SAT, reading and writing, and math, and then our access tests. And then in our high schools, we are also held accountable for post-secondary workforce readiness, as is measured by mean scale scores on SAT, dropout rates, matriculation rates, and graduation rates. As a district, we dropped 1 level in from accredited to accredited with improvement, with a breakdown of the overall sections outlined here. So that last column does show whether we're approaching or meets in achievement and growth by academic level, by elementary, middle, and high school. Elementary and middle school academic growth just dipped just under the cutoff median growth percentile of 50, while growth across high schools increased from an MGP of 51 to 54, which is a celebration. We are keeping a close eye as we see the breakout by schools on this next slide. So these preliminary district and school performance ratings are listed here. You can see that 8 schools maintained their rating between 23 and 24. And Crystal River Elementary improved their rating from improvement to performance. And that's our 1 school to grow a rating. And though nearly all of our schools that maintained their rating had a moderate increase in the earned points. So Purcell Elementary did have an increase of 25 points year over year, which is significant, and it's a celebration. So we're going to ask them what their secrets were. And Glenwood Springs Elementary did also maintain their rating of improvement for the second year after being rated a turnaround in 2022. And finally, 3 schools, Basalt Middle, Glenwood Springs Middle, and Riverview, as well as our overall district rating, declined 1 level into improvement. For Bridges, which is in the 4th row, this is not yet available as of last week, but we did yesterday receive our a performance framework, the AEC report, but which states steady at improvement. And so we'll share more about that. As you know, the performance frameworks are for accountability at a very high level, but don't necessarily actually capture all the very important work that happens within our schools every day, including building relationships with students, our behavior supports, improving work habits, confidence, and persistence, and so much more. That was one of the conversations we had with our high school students who came to join us in our legislative tour on Monday, where there's so many celebrations that they have, and also how are we holding ourselves accountable ultimately to making sure we're serving our students. The performance frameworks for accountability, these are preliminary and we don't anticipate submitting any requests for review, but we have been digging more into the detailed frameworks with school leaders. All the leaders have received it, and since the embargo was lifted at the end of last week, leaders are also beginning to review highlights with their school accountability committees as well, and taking these outcomes into consideration for their strategic work this year. So moving to CMAS, accompanying this deck was a pretty detailed staff memo, so I won't repeat all of that. But I did want to highlight that student performance. I just lost my spot. Student performance in and growth in ELA lags about 10 percentage points behind the state, with big spreads in certain grades and a little closer in the others. This slide shows on the 2 right-hand columns the change in cohort column, which show the difference in percent on or above grade level compared to that same cohort of kids in the previous grade in the past year. So 5th grade right now shows, 4th grade shows a 3.1% increase in percentage of kids who met or exceeded grade level as compared to them as 3rd graders. And so on and so forth. So you can see that shift. You can see the decline in 5th, 6th, and 7th, 8th as they compare to how they performed in the previous grade last year. And that last column year over year shows the percent met or exceeded grade level as compared to kids in that same grade level the previous year. And so that's the difference between the 2 columns there. For both, which you can't see from here, but for both CMAS, math and ELA and elementary grade, every subgroup did, as an aggregate, did increase their mean scale score, which is one of the metric sets outlined in the district performance framework. As you know, the CMAS does include elementary and middle grades. And you can see the sort of the difference in year over year performance and then change in cohort as well. And this slide over here, sorry, the numbers are small, but if you look a little closer, it shows a percentage of students, again, meeting or exceeding grade level expectations, but this is by subgroup. We continue to have a goal of closing the differences in achievement between our subgroups, including students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, by race, students with disabilities, and emergent bilingual students. While a highlight here is that FRL eligible students increased in their percent meeting or exceeding grade level by almost 5 percentage points. You can see that we still do have a lot of work to do to close the differences in achievement between those groups. This disaggregated data does help us actually see a little bit more into the larger numbers to see where we need to concentrate our efforts. The disaggregated growth is shown here. And so the state sets 50 as a median growth percentile. And last year, you can see the 2023 column, our median growth percentiles across all subgroups most of them exceeded 50, with the exception of students with IEPs that was at 46. This past spring, we came in with an overall median growth percentile of 48.5, and you can see the variances between the subgroups as compared to the state, which is that first column with the pink header. While we had great growth in 22-23, I think our key work is going to be how to maintain and accelerate growth year over year, as we are looking at our performance and thinking about our actions that we're taking in our schools, to make sure students are able to access their content in the classroom and maintain their growth. You can see this between the green and the yellow rows. We continue again to need to close our differences in growth and achievement with our subgroups. You'll see that as a common theme. I think that's good. All right, so moving on to CMAS Math. Student performance in CMAS Math was stronger than in ELA, though the percentage of students meeting or exceeding grade level expectations still lags about 10 percentage points behind the state. Some celebrations in the year over year increase in the grade level. In particular, last year's third graders had an almost 8 percentage points increase in the percentage of kids performing at or above grade level expectations. As you know, from our elementary school, we newly launched a lesson of math, and for the first time, we had a common K-12 math curriculum. And that was a big shift in how we're teaching math as well. And so I don't think that's the only thing. I think there's a ton of work also by our teachers as well, but that's a notable highlight and positive impact of our curricular change. Last year's 8th grade cohort increased the at or above grade level expectation percentage by over 7 percentage points, but you can see that there's also almost a 9 percentage points less than the 8th graders before them. And so we do want to look at the change in cohort and also the year over year change, which is why both numbers are there. Similarly to CMAS ELA, the slide shows the disaggregated achievement. A notable highlight here that I mentioned was evident in the ELA as well is that the elementary aged free and reduced lunch eligible students on CMAS Math had an 8.6 points increase in the mean scale score. And regarding growth, our students with disabilities in elementary school, so this is actually an aggregate of elementary and middle, which is why the numbers are different. But in elementary school had a 15.5 points increase in their median growth percentile, a celebration, but also still, as you can see here, we have work to do in terms of making sure we are growing our groups. You can see on the right-hand column, a lot more green in the year over year change for subgroups than we saw in the CMAS ELA. And so both with the achievement and growth, our students are performing a little bit better in math on CMAS than in ELA. Similarly here with their disaggregated growth year over year, the change in 23-24, you can see that number on the right-hand column as compared to the state in 2024. In most areas, actually, I think in every area, we have exceeded the MGP for the state, which you can see in the 2024, declined a little bit compared to 2023, especially as you're looking at the MGP of 53 for Hispanic students in 2023, declined to 49.5 in 2024. And again, we want to maintain our growth that we have. We don't want just 1 year, like this is great, a high rate of growth, but then not actually maintain that pace. So that is something that we're continuing to focus on. CMAS Science is a test that's given in 5th, 8th, and 11th grades. And so you can read this here, but one of the highlights is that our percentage participation in 11th grade in 2023 was 24%, and increased to 87% participation in this past spring, which is pretty huge. The overall percentage of students performing at or above grade level is still lagging when you look at the state percentage in the second and right-hand column. The year over increase for 5th grade and 11th grade is a celebration. The decline in 8th grade is less so. Science is more, this is helpful actually for science teachers to know how kids are doing, but also a reminder because it is added back to the school performance framework. It is something that we want to make sure that we're monitoring as well. I'm going to shift over to PSAT and SAT Spring 2024. A couple of notes, actually, before I get into this, that you may or may not know. The PSAT SAT made some numerous enhancements to the assessments this year that did affect student testing and scores. It included that it was all digital this past spring, which made some things easier and some things a little harder. Surprisingly, we didn't get scores faster, which we thought we would. Students may have, but we didn't at school, so we waited just as long. It was a computer-based administration mode. There were some new item types. There were adjustments to content distributions. For example, for the SAT, there were more advanced math and geometry and less data analysis and problem solving that were included. There are different technical approaches that led to just more precise measurement. Another note here is that in math in particular, students across the state scored lower as a whole on the 2024 digital PSAT SAT compared to their counterparts who took the prior paper version of the assessment, which sparked a lot of conversation from the State Board of Education. And so new graduation requirements for the SAT cut scores are possible, and we'll know after the State Board meeting at the end of this month. And specifically currently for the state graduation requirements for SAT math is 500. There's a possibility it will lower to 480. We won't have confirmation of that for a couple more weeks. But a recommendation from the state and something that we do plan to do is use the spring 2024 scores as a baseline for future year comparisons, especially because the quote common shock was that everything changed to digital. So we're starting from there. This is our growth, their performance levels for EBRW and math by student count. On the left is the numbers of students that perform below grade level. The light mauve color is approaching grade level expectations, and the met or exceeded is in that teal color. I think I mentioned this before, but that margin of approaching grade level expectations is only about 20 points. And so to increase 20 points in the score is pretty significant, but you can see it's just such a small number of kids, just that range is pretty small. But it's a helpful indicator to know 20 points is actually can significantly move you into a different performance band. So that's something that we do talk about with our high school leaders. Our disaggregated year-over-year growth is included here for PSAT 9 math and shows between the years, shows between 23 and 24 along with comparison to the state. One thing I did actually notice is I think that right-hand column actually shows the difference between 2023 and the state rather than the change in our district between 23 and 24. So please ignore that last column right now, but there's an improvement when you see the growth in the 2024 column. So that's why those numbers don't add up and the colors don't add up. PSAT10 year-over-year growth is listed here as well. It does show the difference between spring 23 and 24 for the district. A highlight here is that the growth of the students with IEPs with an MGP of 42 is up 11.5 points from last year at 30.5. So it's a good highlight there. Our EBRW growth is also listed here. We had some increases, which you can see. So it's kind of the opposite, right? We had stronger math performance in our elementary grades and lower math performance in our high school grades. I think for different reasons, I wouldn't look at that as like what's happening here, but it is an interesting thing, I think, to see with our EBRW performance and the change year over year increases across most groups. For multilingual learners, there was a decline of 7.5 points between 23 and 24 in terms of their median growth percentile. Here for SAT, it's a very similar graph when you're looking at below grade level expectations approaching and met or exceeded grade level expectations. Just for SAT by student count. And then our disaggregated year-over-year growth. The highlights that when you look at the state MGP for EBRW, in most of the cases, we are exceeding the state. The exception is, again, our multilingual learners and students in IEPs. So I don't want to gloss over that, especially because there are two subgroups that we have identified early on as ones where we want to make sure that they are growing. In particular, also with the very big shift actually in the year-over-year growth in EBRW with 50.5 in 2023 and 26 in 2024. We did have higher participation as well, which also helps us hold ourselves accountable. And we'll also see shifts in the achievement and growth of those subgroups. And here's SAT 11 math year-over-year growth. Really, when you see the comparison of all the yellow in 2023 and 2024, we have decreased that a bit. That's primarily in not necessarily in the subgroups that we're focusing on. So when you look at, the increase for like white students or non-minority students or FRL not eligible. So we, again, we knew this, we identified the focus work we need to serve our subgroups. Sorry, that was a lot shocking, but to sum up, These results, we had a lot of intentional work in our strategic plan and the work that we've mapped out for this year and the next 5 years. And so just to sum up what we're continuing to do, it's continuing to build our data culture with building skill among our leaders and teachers and interpreting data platforms and using them like EduClimber and NWA, as well as building skill with responding to data in a timely way. We've also launched a district-wide coaching platform across all of our schools to work towards excellence in coaching and quality instruction in every classroom, and also to make sure that we're streamlining and integrating supports for our teachers. We're working on building skill with intentional lesson planning that supports our emerging bilingual students and plan for appropriate accommodations for our students with disabilities. And of course, we're continuing to strengthen our work with school and classroom climate, primarily with the work of our deans, counselors, and leaders, but understanding that that's part of the bigger system. Questions?
Thank you. Oh, am I not on? Director DeFreitas is going to step out and we'll continue the meeting. We'll still have 4 board directors here, so we'll maintain a quorum. Thanks. We'll begin questions with Director Tyler.
Thank you for that presentation. The first question I have, what is the difference between multilingual learners versus like Hispanic? What is the definition of the multilingual learner?
Multilingual learners include students who are NEP, LEP, Monitor 1, Monitor 2, Exit 1, Exit 2. Not every student identified as Hispanic is also a multilingual learner.
Okay, thank you. So
Mhm.
basically an emergent bilingual in other
Mhm.
terms.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. I know for just everybody who's here that we've had a long dive into this already an hour ahead of time. And so we've gotten a lot of questions answered already. I have just sort of as a follow-up from what we were talking about earlier, Chief Park, when we were talking about results of I'll just use what's here as Hispanic and white on the disaggregated growth data in several of the different slides. With the exception of the PSAT10, the white students have always have a greater growth percentile than the Latino or the Hispanic students. Can you give us your thoughts on why? Because I know we were talking about some new students, but with growth percentiles, it doesn't take into account those new students because they wouldn't have that growth number.
Sure, the new students who took the assessment, but it does still include students who we've had who have continued to take the assessment year over year. I think one of the things too is what we can't see here is the intersectionality between students who would hold multiple identities that's reflected here because they're all shown separately. And so is your question about why do we persistently see that difference?
I'm wondering if you can cast any light on why the growth, what is it you call it, MG?
The median growth percentile.
MGP, the median growth percentile, why would it be higher for whites than Hispanics on a consistent basis throughout? What is it that we're doing as a school that's showing that our whites are growing better than our non-whites?
I just want to make sure I understand your question. You're asking.
So when I look, so for example, if I just look at the slide above the board discussion one, and if I look at Hispanic growth percentile, it's 46 and the white percentile is 54. So we're saying that if we had 100 kids in the same pot and next year they had a new score, that they weren't growing as well from year to year, the Hispanic students as the white students.
Right. Even though there's an increase from the previous year from 38 to 46, they're not quite yet growing at the same rate as our white students.
Right. But if we're saying like, this is, from my understanding of this data, it's showing us that the Hispanic students in this are doing poorer the next year because they were behind, like 50.
They're not
50
growing at the same rate.
Right. But a 50th percentile would have them be the same the next year as they were the previous year, like in the same place. And we're showing here that the Hispanic students are testing worse and the white students are testing better.
So is your question, what are we doing about that?
Or can you shed light on why you think that is?
I mean, I think part of it is how we're intentionally planning to support our emerging bilingual students, for example, who might be a Hispanic student who is an emerging bilingual student. I think with our we've identified already, especially with our multilingual learners, that we're not growing the group as we want to and as we should. And so we have differences there. And I think it's continued to work to make sure that we're really intentional looking at our disaggregated data, making sure that we're not just looking at an aggregate of growth or achievement, and then making some decisions, instructional decisions that may not actually be targeting the right groups of students. And so we do want to make sure that all of our students are growing at a rate where they're making at least a year's worth of growth. And we know that we need to have some subgroups growing at a faster rate or accelerating that because there's more to grow. Yep.
Okay, I'll come back in our 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Director After?
Thanks. As Director Tyler said, we had a good deep dive on the performance frameworks earlier. So I'm actually going to direct my questions to the topic of safety and security and communications, if that's okay, Dr. Cole.
No, you can't,
Why?
because that's not the part that we're on in the agenda.
She did it at the, what's that? It was an update, not.
Yeah, it was an update. It wasn't an interactive discussion. Sorry.
I know, I have the same for thing written down. I rescind my out of order, sorry. Even though it's been discussed.
Yeah, the agenda topic and item, we have to stick to the topic that's listed.
Okay.
I think it goes under our board comments.
What do you mean?
Like whatever we have to say about that would go under board comments.
At the end of the night.
You can share it in your comments and updates at the end of the night.
Okay.
I too was having the same
But I can ask questions then,
about that.
You can ask questions about this topic.
but not about security. Okay. I have one question about the performance framework.
Okay.
I asked a lot of questions in the previous session. There's one I'm curious about. Is there a difference in results by school composition? So do we see a difference in, say, performance with fifth graders who are in middle school versus fifth graders who are in elementary school? That is my question.
I
Or
did
do you-
notice.
do you know?
I did notice in last year. Yes, I don't have hard numbers, but we did consider, is a fifth grader at an elementary school performing better or worse or differently than a fifth grader at a middle school? I think I don't think it was a significant difference, but it was a question that we had asked, so.
Okay. That's my only question.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Director Ramirez.
So it would be great to have that information. I actually have never thought of that question. I think that's a really good one for us to look into. Can you guys actually hold on? I'm going to take it back 1 second because I do think it's important, especially as we're diving into this new set of data. Can you guys please give us a definition for the academic achievement and academic growth and how they're different? How we're define it, I guess. Layman's
Yes.
terms.
Academic achievement is looking at the percentage of kids who are meeting or exceeding grade level expectations. It's typically by the mean scale score. Academic growth is looking at the median growth percentile, and that's typically 50. There's ranges that are actually outlined on the back, but it's looking at how much did kids grow as compared to the previous year.
Thank you. We sort of mentioned the strategic plan, and I'm wondering, how are we going to use the strategic plan to help us with this moving forward? And can you guys elaborate on that?
Help us with this, with our performance
data?
framework.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so I did mention actually the strategic priority number 2, which has a number of initiatives there. I think the one thing that we had shared in the work session is that we've been closely monitoring this. And so seeing and anticipating if we're going to hit our projected targets or not. And so part of the work to continue to build skill in leaders and teachers and understanding and interpreting their data that's actionable. And so that's actually before CMAS or PSAT, because we don't get the results till later. So we're in the process of training folks on NWA, for example, and interpreting the reports, actually testing the folks, the kids within the beginning, middle, and end of year, understanding how to interpret their instructional areas and sort kids by how they're performing in that. So they really can be targeted in either the standards that they're reteaching or the groups that they're pulling together. Identifying for intervention groups is one. So it's pretty granular, but those are some of the actions that we see has a direct relation to ultimately how kids are doing on this very high level of accountability.
And I couldn't find it, but I know that we have a data dashboard as part of that. Is that what does that implementation look like?
Yeah, that's in progress. That's in progress. We do have an external consultant that we found through the RFP process who's working on that data dashboard specifically to track our strategic priority measures.
And the hope is that we would, as board members, public, schools, what is the hope with that?
That there's a public facing one that appropriately keeps personal identifying information confidential, but then there's also an internal one as we as we're monitoring specific metrics that we've outlined in our strategic plan.
I did want to have a follow-up question to our conversation from the work session. And I was just thinking about as we were talking about achievement and growth, what is the gap that we are seeing comparative to last year with this year's data? Have we looked to see what our numbers are between? I mean, I know that we have it here on the data, but do we, between our Hispanic students, white students, and our free reduced lunch students, have we come to a place where we're like, okay, we know for sure that we have either closed on this gap or it's widened?
I'm going to try to understand different from what's here, for example, or.
Yeah, so when we talk about our achievement gap and within our students, you know, we obviously 40% is huge. Have we as a district come to a place using this data where we have felt that we've either moved the needle on that, or has this data let us know that we haven't done anything?
On some, so that's that right-hand column where we see the different, where it's red if that gap is bigger or has increased year over year for that subgroup, or green if it's getting closer. I wouldn't say any of them have been closed.
Okay. I sort of posed a question to you guys as the team that is in charge of this to sort of help us as board members to understand the narrative of the data right now. So
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you for this and for pulling it all together. I know it's a quick turnaround, and I'm always excited to get it. There are some things that I think are great highlights and other things that obviously we still have a lot more work to do. My question is really around the way that we talked about this in the work session. In 2023, our 2023 data, we seem to be moving the needle a little quicker, and we've backslid some. And one thing that I remember as a board member were really aggressive goals set by the administration about moving every child a band, moving all of our numbers consistently. And we were pounding the drum on that. Every time that we spoke to you all about data, we heard that over and over again. And then I realized I haven't heard that recently. I feel like we stopped pounding that drum in some ways. And so I'm curious, we could guess forever about why the shift, I guess, but it just does seem to be a shift between 23 and 24. And I'm wondering if part of that was around like the focus. Do you feel like it was a different level of focus that we placed on it in this last year? I know that there's been an increase in the overall, the number of students taking the test, which I greatly appreciate, but just trying to identify some other cause. Because I just remember that consistently hearing that from you all every single time. Like, this is aggressive, but we're doing it. We're moving it. We're doing it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I haven't heard that. in a long time.
That's interesting because I hadn't thought about that way, because we still internally say that often, and it's in all of our like big strategic plan mission measures, like all of those, like making the growth and the levels. But that's an interesting point that I can bring it back, because that's still very much consistent. Like, every kid can grow. We're not saying that every kid has to be at provision or grade level in a year, but every single kid should grow at least one level. I think that like
Just the momentum around it.
Yeah.
I feel like
I appreciate that.
For me, that was something that I took away. And I don't know if there's anything else you can identify, any differences year over year. It's just, I know it's not it can never be a quick fixed. And in looking at the school year over year performance frameworks, like you see Basalt Elementary went from priority in 2019 to performance in 2022 and has sustained it, but that's an outlier. And I don't know, it's confounding.
I think, it's really, I think, challenging when we're looking at data because we can get in the weeds. But one thing that's been consistent with all of your questions, especially here, are those higher level questions. I think Director Tytler, you kind of started with the why do we still have an achievement gap? Like across racial subgroups at a very basic level, to this, like, where are the trends? Where are we headed? And when we look at that school over school, it's not lost on me that, we have, when we think about high level trends, like, yeah, all our middle schools had a really rough year. We have, every one of them slipped. Except when you look at, like, Riverview is a little different as a middle school when you pull it out from the K-5. And it's also, we think about things. And again, these are the kinds of questions we start to get really curious about, knowing that we've had a lot of turnover in our middle school leadership. And the areas where we're seeing schools making very slow, steady gains, when we look at CRES, when we look at BES, they've had continuity of leadership. They've had lower turnover on their staff, and again, these are correlations, right? And that's what I think we do grasp at when we look at this data, is like, where are the trends? Where are the patterns? Where's the silver bullet that's going to explain why these are tenacious gaps? Why, to your question, Director Ramirez, we know this gap exists. Is it getting smaller? Is it getting bigger? Is it just stuck? And I think that's where, at least for us, we look at these high level trends and then we dive deep with the schools, with their data, with their classrooms, with their cohorts, with their kids. And that's the work that's been happening. And we talked a little bit about this with the kind of more cadence of an NWEA assessment, which is our assessment we use throughout the year, which is a predictor of all of these. And that data tells very different stories about different subgroups. It breaks, say, a group of students that are currently named Hispanic into groups that are looking at the more nuanced language acquisition skills that subgroup of kids, many of them as emerging bilinguals, have a diversity of language skills and language levels. And I think we see these challenging names of groups in terms of Hispanic, white, that really don't include the multiple identities that kids bring to a classroom, the different skill sets, the different backgrounds, the socioeconomic differences, that we don't always see the overlay until we look at a more granular level. And I will say that, the pieces that I think culturally really, really matter that Chief Park mentioned around that data culture. And, I've been in the district over 8 and 9 years now, and the data culture work that Chief Park has led across our schools, ensuring that leaders, from school leaders to content leads to instructional facilitators, know how to manipulate and use like NWA data. We have to remember that 4 years ago, we weren't even consistent about having that data, much less knowing how to look at it and target certain students. So I think that these high level trends are really important. The accountability is really important. I think the devil's in the details about where the work is and where the interventions are. Schools, as we know, our schools have different programs that they're using to deliver. Their models are different. We don't see trends that certain programs are far surpassing others. I think it all comes down to, I think we continually hear about, the lived experience of kids in our classrooms, their access and engagement with rigorous content, the supports that they're getting to meet them where they're at and push. And so that, I think what isn't seen here is that work that's happening. And I think a lot of that is articulated in the strategic plan. Those 4 components that Chief Park kind of ended with: data culture, coaching, lesson plan development with the emerging bilingual student at the center, focusing on school and classroom climate, I think are the kinds of initiatives that we really believe are going to have traction if we can implement with consistency. So I guess those are just some of the things I'm thinking about as I hear you, that I don't want us to miss, to lift up, that is a story underneath a lot of this.
Yeah, we'll start 5 minutes of open discussion, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the explanation. Dr. Tyler, go ahead.
So just as for Director Ramirez, just as a follow-up on the question you asked about the difference between growth and academics, a way that I've looked at it is academics, of course, is just the score, but growth is you would take, there's random numbers that don't really mean anything. Like, so if somebody scores a 220, and I don't know if that's even a number within it, but there's what the state will do is they'll take, if there's 100 kids that scored 220, they'll look at their next year's score and they'll rank them 1 to 100 of those two kids, all the kids who scored 220, and they'll put them from 1 to 99, and that would be their growth of how they did compared to all the other kids that scored 220 the next year. And with that in mind, and us looking at the scores of our growth, and if we are having growth numbers that are lower for the Hispanic students than the white students, and especially lower for multilingual learners than even the Hispanic students, and if we're showing that it's growth, and if their growth's consistently less, then we need to see a growth score that is even plus higher than to make up that gap. And if we're seeing lower scores, that gap's not getting made up. And the academic scores that we're looking, and we're saying there's reasons behind maybe why or maybe why not, but academically, we're not growing growth scores, we're not growing. And you talk about, Dr. Cole, how about the devil is in the details? And my question then on that is, what are we doing programming wise then to meet those? Like, what programming changes are we making for these students who have been not growing and have this achievement gap? And I understand that we can teach with fidelity and we can teach with the best practices, but if we've been doing that and trying to do our best job at that, what is the differences we're doing with the programming to make a change there?
Can I respond or should I wait?
Sure,
You can respond.
please.
One of the things I think, I don't want the narrative going away is that it's only multilingual learner students as part of our Hispanic students that are not growing, because we do know that the group of Hispanic identified students encompasses more than just our multilingual learners. There's like English for, so when we think about, I think it's programming, but also when we're thinking about engagement and how students feel invested and involved in school, I think that's a big factor. And we see those differences in our Healthy Kids Colorado survey, for example, or in our Panorama survey. And so I think programming is one piece, but it's also thinking about the bigger picture of how welcome and how much belonging and how much investment are we creating for all of our students. And, you know, the reason we sometimes can't show like public data across multiple lines, like if we're looking at Hispanic males in high school or in a particular grade, it's just because the more levels we put in, then the data privacy laws, right? Like we can't do this so they're not identifiable, but it is something we do think about, right? Like how across multiple levels here are we serving our students? And in some cases we do see where the achievement or growth is lower for fluent English or primary Hispanic students whose primary language is English. And so those are just different things, but that is an indicator. I just share that because that it's some of the ways that we are looking at our data in a more nuanced way.
Madam Chair, can I add 5 minutes to the clock?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask Chief Landon to add 5 minutes when this time runs out.
Thank you. I did want to make a comment, and I appreciate wholeheartedly that this team has put an emphasis on data. I feel like data has been huge to our recent success in being able to not only really understand where we're at, but to really be able to define where we need to go. So I first want to make sure that I state that, because I feel like that is something that I, as a board member who's been here for 5 years, on my 5th year, have felt and seen that change. And I appreciate that work and that commitment from our team. I also feel that it's super important to stress that part of the reason that I think this board has really pushed on our team to sort of define what is the reasoning of why we're not seeing that growth is because it's been a long conversation. Like this has been, and we know that it's not going to get done overnight, or, that we need to have a strategic plan and systems in place. And I believe in the continuity of making sure that if a student is transferring out of Basalt to Glenwood Springs High School, that there is a system in place that can carry them through. And so my push, and I, said this in the work session, would be for our team to just ensure that there is a norm moving forward, that all of our schools, all of our teams understand that data does play a role, obviously. And the hope would be that regardless of who's in leadership of the school, regardless of the turnover of the class or of leadership within the school, that every student in every classroom will be successful. And so I think for me as a board member, and I think for us as a team, like that, just being able to have alignment with you guys on that is really important, because I do think like we are all having that North Star moment of like, this is where we want to go. I just think there's a lot of refinement that needs to happen. And I also think that it feels like it's taken a long time. And so, you know, earlier today to the conversation about school belonging, I believe wholeheartedly that we need to get on that soon, because it's been a conversation that's been going on through our district for years. And I do think that that plays a key factor. I agree that there's other things. I agree that attendance and getting kids to commit and like having that be a norm is helpful to us. Accountability for all students and their success is important for us. I just want to make sure that, you know, to Director Kuhlenberg's point, like if that's what we are going to be about, let's be about it in every room. Like, let's make sure that we're being clear about what our norms and our expectations are for everyone. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I agree. And that was my point in bringing up just the fact that it feels different sitting here, I guess, around data. And I'm happy to hear that it's not that way internally. But I think even that public facing message of like, because I remember it was consistent. Like, I remember you like sitting here and telling me, nope, we're doing it. Like, it's really aggressive, but we're doing it. We're going for it. And just like having that consistent messaging has such an impact on people's mindset and their ability. And I think that is important. I did have one other specific question. Is there any way for us to access like school specific disaggregated data for CMAS and PSAT, SAT? Because every time I go in to school view, it says that the sample size is too small. I can only see male, female, and then FRL and non-FRL. I can't see anything broken down by race, multilingual learners. I can't see.
On the performance framework,
Yeah,
it's in their actual report.
not the public facing one. I
Oh,
can't find
yeah.
it.
Okay.
And I think that would be helpful for us to see and for everyone to see, because I think some of the specific questions that board members have about programming and targeting programming, we don't see any of, like, we can't see that. Like, I can't see the differences in achievement except on internal assessments at different schools that I have access to, but on CD's website, I can't see it. Can you guys? I
feel like
can't.
I've been able to see it at one point in time, but
I
haven't looked
couldn't
at
in
them.
2023 and I can't on the 2024 new performance frameworks that are out. I mean, I just looked.
I know if the number's under 16, you can't see it.
It just, like, right now I can only see male, female on any school that I pull up.
Either send you a click path link.
Okay.
Or we'll send you the, a way to look at the data.
And you'll send that to the board as in you. Thank you.
do we still have time?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, looking at the results that we have now in front of us from last spring, and do you have NWEA yet for this first quarter or for this first trimester?
The window closes Friday.
Okay. So my question is, what is the goal for next year? And like, what is your hope and your aspiration for the district's data for this, when we're all sitting here this time next year? What do you think a reasonable objective would be? Would it be like stepwise growth so that we have more schools in the green than yellow? Is that reasonable?
In the performance framework or
Yeah.
our academic goals?
In the performance framework?
I mean, ideally, we'd move all of our, any with school and improvement, we'd move back up to performance at a minimum. I do think at a minimum, as Director Kuhlenberg was saying, we should move every kid at least one performance band, which you may not see necessarily. You won't see that necessarily in achievement for everybody, especially if you're moving from one lower band to the next, but every student should grow at least that much, which isn't necessarily a year's worth of growth, but it's at least a performance band that is, I think, something clearer and tangible to say, like, I'm going to move from this orange color to yellow color.
Yeah.
I feel like that should just be, I mean, speaking about board goals, I mean, that might as well be an organizational goal.
Well, I would mean that if you remember our strategic plan has mission measures. Remember the Thrive, Learn, Launch measures.
Those are it.
And at the end of 5 years, we have pretty specific goals about kind of our median growth plan percentages for ELA. You know, there are, you know, we have very specific measures around mastery data, growth data, students hitting literacy benchmarks on DIBELS, that we have a 2029 end of year target that then breaks down into is like there are targets for the CMAS 2025 data that were part of the strategic plan. So we have very incremental growth goals to see that we're on track to hit I think our goal for 2029 ELA for CMAS was a 56% mastery, students performing at mastery. Math was 45%. Medium, the MGP that we've been talking about for CMAS is all with no disparities between student subgroups. For 2029 target for CMAS, MGP for English language arts was 65 and math is the same. So we do have those targets, and then we have them broken down year over year. So what you'll start to see on the data dashboard, when we're able to launch that with our partner, and ideally that's this fall, is our distance to target based on our most recent data. And so that'll be on that dashboard to show, here's where our 2024 data is, here's where we're trying to get to and how far are we.
So what I'm hearing you say is it could be an organizational goal because we're going to do it anyway.
It is an organization.
It is
I mean,
an
it is. It's in the
It is
strategic
in
plan
the
that we
strategic
adopted
plan.
as a team in the spring. So it is. I
With
mean, like,
incremental annual goals.
And so my question then would be, is that because, and I know that now I'm getting off of the subject of this whole thing.
And
but-
we're out of time.
I know. But, the strategic plan rollout, that has not happened. Has it?
no, it's out. I mean, it's
Happened.
out. The webpage is up. We're working on it. The piece that's not there is the data dashboard. It's in progress. It's still being worked on. There's still the backend system to try to get the data automatically uploaded to it. But all of the CMAS data, this PSAT data is part of it and has been, you know, is part of the targets. But so that the dashboard is the only piece that's not out.
So every building leader should be aware of that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And when they were building goals for this year, they were tying them to the strategic plan. We were pulling up strategic plans. They're setting goals around their own data.
Okay, thank you.
I think we could talk about data for days, but thank you.
Thank you.
Our next business in order is approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel minutes from the 8/28 board meeting and policies AC, GBAA, and JBB, and exhibits ACE-1 and AC-E-2. Are there any items that you would like to pull off of the consent agenda for separate consideration and vote? Being none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I move that the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
A second.
Can you please call the vote?
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director Teitler,
Aye.
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez.
Motion passes. Just approve the consent agenda. The next business in order is discussion based on the first reading of policies ACA, AEA, KDE, GBA, and JRA/JRC. The following second read policies can also be discussed if necessary. Those are AC-R-1, AC-R-2, and AC-R-3. Each board member will have 2 minutes to start, and we'll begin. with
Director Kuhlenberg,
Yeah.
we skipped over public
Oh,
comment.
I'm sorry.
Although we have no speakers, that section of the agenda.
It's actually not showing up on my agenda on Diligent.
It's on mine. Yeah, it's mine on too.
Mine was, oh, it was ahead of consent. Sorry. Okay. Should I go back and do it?
Do we have someone sign up for public comment?
No, we don't have anyone signed
Okay.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Trying to think about how I phrase this. I'm going to go back to item 5. I inadvertently skipped it. Item 5 is public comment. At this time, we would have welcomed members of the public to speak. We had 0 members signed up. We did receive 2 written comments. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may always do so in writing at any time. And the board has seen those 2 comments. My apologies. We'll jump back to item 7. or item 8, excuse me, policy review. And jump into discussion. Director After, do you have comments, questions? I know this is a lot of policies, so if we
Yeah.
need additional time.
I do have some, let me just get my question pulled up here. Okay. ACA on name changes. Just pulling it up. The way that this policy reads is that this is specifically in the context of changing names related to gender identity. Is that the intention here? Or like if a kid was just changing their name, does this apply?
Both and.
Okay.
Mhm.
And is this change CASB protocol
It's
requirement?
There's a component around state statute.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. AEA, that one is standards-based education. When I read this, my only comment was that was a question is, do we need to define what an academic standard is? Because my first thought was that I have heard of the American Birthright curriculum referred to as a standard, which I don't know that that is accurate, but the way this reads is, could anyone write a quote unquote standard? And we therefore need to consider it per this policy, or is standard a specific term we can define in here and therefore be really focused on state approved or accredited standards by the state?
Great question. Did you? I can. Go ahead. I mean, I would say that what we're referencing, and perhaps it's not clear, and so that's a fair push of like, do we need to define it? When we named with policy committee, state and national academic standards instead of district standards, you're right, we are making the assumption that this is the state adopted standards and federally or nationally recognized standards, which is distinct from something like American Birthright standards, which are an independent group proposing educational standards. All kinds of educational groups propose standards.
Right.
What we are implying, what we meant to imply, and I think is fair feedback to say, define what you mean by which state standards. We could have stronger language to say that what we mean is like Colorado Department of Education adopted state standards. And further define that. That was the intent. I don't know if Directors Kohlenberg or Directors Ramirez, you want to speak more to that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and so I guess up to the team, if that makes sense, but I feel like without a clear definition, we're opening ourselves up to a question as to what exactly makes a standard.
I'm fine further defining it. I guess I don't agree that it's necessary because we do define them as state and national standards. So we say that we've adopted a standards-based education system that focuses on student learning of state and national academic standards.
And if you think that's good enough, because if you look up American Birthright or some similar.
It says it's standard-based, but these say they have to be state or national standards, and they're not.
If we just
state
say like
standards.
accredited or
Yeah.
approved.
We could say
or
approved. yeah.
Federally, yeah, not federal, but.
State approved?
State approved.
Okay, that was my only question on that. Sorry, going back to my notes. Okay, KDE is about the crisis plan. Sorry. The safety readiness and incident management plan. So this was on my mind prior to Monday. Because of national events and because there were some comments in the document that, oh shoot,
You can go ahead.
that directed or referred to our crisis response plan. And so I had a chance to click on that and look through it a little bit. And so my question for the team is that up to date? And also, is there it's quite long, it's like 47 pages or something. And I think in an actual crisis, someone wouldn't be able to read that quickly. And so I had a general question about how how the team uses that document and that plan, since it was referred to in KDE.
Great question. So our crisis response plan, sometimes we refer it internally as the blue book. And if you go into any of our offices or any principal's office, look for it. You'll see a blue binder. They're all the same color. That's the crisis response plan. We as a district invested last year in a safety and security coordinator, Dustin Gehring.
Mhm.
His primary job is to update and maintain that blue book. And it's absolutely a living internal document. It is not, we keep it internal because it has a lot of plans and protocols that don't need to be publicly distributed. And nor would it be safe to do so. And so that plan is virtual living. And so it's bookmarked. It's on every easy access for leaders, but it also, every significant update, Dustin makes copies and goes in and replaces all of those in everyone's binders. So the binders will have quick use tabs. We have a number of guides for school leaders of how to get to things very quickly. Because you're right, it's that, and that document really is meant to be used in a crisis. And so yes, it's long, it's very protocol-y, but it's also like in hard copy in our buildings in case we weren't, virtual formats weren't available. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Ramirez.
Okay, so I did have a question on ACA. How are we gonna ensure that staff or teachers, and I ask this question because I've seen it happen, I guess, with the knowledge of its existence, that teachers aren't giving kids or a chosen name just because they have like two kids with the same name in the classroom.
So this policy, right, directs the district to have a process. And we have a very standardized name change form that parents sign off on, that changes the way a name will show up in attendance. So I have for example, I have a daughter whose birth certificate says Margaret. And if you call her that, she's not going to be very happy. She's Maggie. Everybody calls her Maggie. And so the onus is on me to fill out that form so that substitute teachers and anybody who walks in that room knows that it's Maggie. She can't walk into class one day and say, call me Meg, until I really kind of sign that form, and then it'll show up in all of our district documents that her chosen name that her parent has signed off on is Maggie. And so we have those processes now, the accountability to make sure that we're calling kids by the names that they've chosen and they've done the paperwork on. That's going to happen in the classrooms, and it's going to happen through coaching and through talking to kids and making sure and educating teachers and substitute guest teachers that, the names that we're showing you are the children's, the chosen and preferred names that we are using consistently. So there's a system that we use in terms of name change forms, that then create all the integrated systems so that we see that in records.
So I hear you on that of you as a parent, but in this policy, it says that that their parents don't have to be notified. I feel like I read it here somewhere. Students will not be required to provide proof of a legal name change, and do not need parental approval.
True. We, as a board of education, given the state statute, and this is actually really interesting because it's happening in districts all across the state right now. The gray area that you have as a board is whether or not you're going to require parental approval. For us, it is always best practice to have parental approval on these sorts of changes. But where the recommended stance that you're seeing from this team is that we would recommend that you bring that it does not necessarily need parental approval. We would have a really hard time, I would say, in the coaching that we provide for staff around supporting students when it comes to mental health, when it comes to integrated health services and accessing those sorts of things, is we all know it's going to work better. Everything's going to work better supporting kids if their parents are part of the process. There are very few, very, very, very rare incidences where because of a child's safety, there might not be that information sharing with parents. In that those cases, our guidance and our training for staff is it ought to be such a significant safety concern that we are not notifying parents, that we are simultaneously actually notifying Department of Human Services with a mandated report or call. And that it is in the interest of a child's safety that something is happening, a name change, a mental health service, that there's not parental notification. So we're keeping that open here. And that's an area that you as a board could say, no, we disagree. We're keeping that open here, that we would honor and respect the child's chosen name. If they go to the effort of not coming in on a random day and saying, today, call me this, today, call me that. But no, you need to fill out a form. There's a spot for your parent's signature. We really need you to get your parent's signature. If you can't, let's talk more about that. And that it would force a conversation would be the way we would work with that.
So, yeah, personally, I guess when I'm thinking of accountability, I'm really worried about that. I think that, one, I worry about the accountability for the district in making sure that we are, like, I'll give you an example. Like a kid could be like Tyler A and Tyler J. And like, who knows if that kid wants to be called Tyler J, but that is something that, you know, I think happens oftentimes. And I have been told by parents that like, they wish that they were notified that their kid goes by a different name in the classroom, even though it's really for classroom success so that they know which kid they're talking to. But I do think there have been situations where like they'll change, you know, a kid's name is Alejandro and they'll call him Alex. And so, you know, when I think of accountability, I'm thinking of it from not only like our side as a district, of making sure that our staff is being diligent with this process of calling our students by their chosen name, but also the parents who, I think, and you know, especially when we're thinking of our K through 12 kids, like they deserve, in my opinion, to be part of that process of being aware that their child is going by a different name in school, even if it is just like a Alex from Alejandro, you know, because that's part of their identity in their classrooms. So I just wanted to share that concern because I do feel like this might be something that, you know, I understand the need to want it. And, you know, I see that it's a new CASB recommendation, but I think just from like my lived experience as a student and also my like just experience with families in our community, I'm a little like wondering how this is gonna play out, how we're gonna make sure we're accountable to this. And I had other questions on the other policies, but I can wait for my 5 minutes. So sorry.
Dr. Tyler?
Thank you. My first question is on policy KDE. Within this National Incident Management System that we're using, NIMS, is this something that is just built in and baked into what it is that we do and we follow that, or do we know, or is there anything that schools need to know about this NIMS and how is that communicated, or is that just within the whole protocol of how we do things?
You know, my understanding of this, and I can get a deeper answer reported to you, is that it's a structure that created the initial, right, our NIMS compliance that we were approved in 2017. It created the kind of organizational structure of our crisis management plan, that we had the appropriate components. In terms of, you know, do we need to get that upgraded every year? I'm not sure. We could find out more about what the details.
And specifically, like, do schools need to do anything, or as long as they're following what our new hire, Dustin Guerin, is telling them, are they okay? Or is there something that we need to know about that? So I guess that's my question.
I'll dig in a little more on that.
Thank you. On this on GBA, where it talks about open hiring and equal employment opportunity, where it says it's critical for academic growth, that we represent the community that we have. I'm paraphrasing that. The well-being of our students, that staff reflect the cultural, linguistic, racial, and socioeconomic diversity of our students. Is there anything we've done with CMC, with their teacher education, to try to have a stronger relationship to build our own? What kind of steps are we taking with CMC to help us reach that?
You mean aside from the student teachers, we already have the multiple student teachers we have from CMC in completing the program?
So do we have any kind of like, are we like, other than student teachers, like, are we still working with them in any specific way to like say, we can guarantee jobs in our district for X number of students, or, and as we're recruiting and like, I'm not even aware of the student teachers that we do have from CMC. So what kind of steps are we doing with CMC?
I think for the existing student teachers, we do have a number of them, and most, if not many, most of them are actually hired as full-time teachers once they're done with their student teaching. I think the recent MOU was teacher of record program is one where if a student at CMC hasn't necessarily completed all the requirements yet for a bachelor, but they're in that teacher education program, they can be listed as a teacher of record with intentional planning and support. So that's another way that we've also been trying to leverage CMC programming as well. And then we've been in conversation about their apprenticeship program, where the intention there is to also find really great mentors who serve as the apprenticeships. That we haven't done that full-fledged yet. That is something that we're exploring though. One of the things I did share is that we want to make sure that our mentors have capacity, that we have good mentors, number one, for all the students, that they have capacity to do it, and that we can't give a teacher mentor like 5 people, because that would not be fair to
Of
them.
course.
So want to be really mindful about that, particularly because if we're thinking about the demographics of staff or students that might be in the mentorship program or the teacher education program, we don't want to set up a situation where they're set up to fail. So.
Okay. And then I have a couple more questions, and I guess I'll just maybe ask one of them first on JRA, JRC, student release records of information on students. The part where it talks about disclosure to military recruiting officers, is there some kind of policy that we have? Like, so this is saying that we do give that to recruitment officers, access to that information. And is that a customary thing nationwide that's done? Is this similar to like what would be done with the college board, giving it to colleges? And can I just get a little bit more information on why we're releasing those and why they're not just going through like a college, like a job fair type thing to get that information?
It's in accordance with state statute, but there is also a specific opt-out form that we communicate out to families to submit by, I think it's mid-September, if they would like to opt out of that information, because it is additional information beyond what's typical directory information.
And so is that something that like, is that for graduating seniors only? Is it?
No, actually, it starts, I think, in 8th grade. Middle. We definitely have our high school send out notices of sending it out in their memos or to remind to parents to say, if you would like to opt out of this, here is the form, here are the different ways that you can come in. You can do a paper form, you can do it online. But that's typically requested of our high school students.
And it specifically talks about military recruiting officers within that. That's how it's stated, or something of that nature.
To the families, yep, it says, federal law requires us to share student record information with military recruiters. If you want to opt out, please fill that form out.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Thank you. And I'll just have one more when we come back around.
We've been through, oh, okay, great. I don't remember going over JRC policy committee. Did we not do that policy?
It has very minimal changes.
Okay, and I'm just not seeing the changes now.
Way down at the
A
bottom.
date.
Just the date?
That's
Yeah.
what I missed. We did this
Got it.
recently and.
Great.
Correct me if I'm wrong. And we did it recently. We just
Yeah.
needed to get that date in there.
Exactly. Okay,
Yeah,
great. Thank you.
August 30th.
And I got my other questions answered during policy committee. You can see that it's that I made, board can see that it's that I made, and we discussed. I think regarding the name changes policy, this is a state mandated change. This is legislation that was passed last year by the state of Colorado. And we have to have a policy that says that we have a procedure for name changes. I I think it's a fine line between ensuring parental notification and creating an administrative burden. Like both of my kids go by nicknames.
Right.
I've never signed a form. I've never like, so are we gonna make every Robert that goes by Robbie fill out a form? Or like my daughter's Eleanor and she goes by Nora, like. So I think that it's a fine line. I do think that if a teacher is changing a child's name or choosing to call a child something other than the name that is on their form and it's not the child's choice, then there should be parental notification. And I don't know how we would ensure that. I think that's just basic respect for children as human beings, that we shouldn't be renaming them. So I don't know if that's something that we include in this policy, but I don't think that is I don't think that's what this policy is getting after, but I hear your concern,
Yeah.
like loud and clear. So
I actually think that what the policy does is gives us the teeth for exactly what you're naming, Director Ramirez, which we would all agree is like, that is first and foremost, you call a student by the name they tell you is their name.
Yeah.
And you pronounce it correctly and you learn it that way. The way they say it is a best practice. What this does is gives us teeth to say, if you don't do that, you're in violation of board policy. And thus we move to disciplinary action. And you'll actually notice that was that important to us, that we added that text.
I did see
that. So for us,
So you're good.
what really made the like, to us, it gives us a little more teeth. If we're seeing staff not honor a student's preferred name intentionally, to then say, hey, we got a policy that makes this really clear. And so now this allows us to put this in the staff handbook. There is policy. We call kids by their preferred names.
Are you done?
yeah, I can
Okay.
we can go into 5 minutes. I didn't have any other questions on the other policies.
So I appreciate that. Wait, can we start at 5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that because I hear you, the whole Rob Bobby thing. I hear you and I agree that I don't want to make it like tedious. I think though that I think that because it is like, I think that there may be some situations where it could be a thing where, a student has decided to change, where it's not a nickname, right? Where it's like a name change, where I do feel like as a parent, I would want to know. And that's my only, that's my only thing. I feel like I want to make sure I state that because that's important to me as a parent. If my Dylan decided that he wanted to go by Marcus, I'd be like, hey, let's talk about that. Like, do we want to, do this like on a birth certificate kind of thing? So I just want to make sure I state that. I also think,
And I do want to make clear, if it was any type of official name change, there has to be parental notification. That's clear in the
That's
policy.
written there for
Yeah.
legal name change or official name change.
Anything in the student's record,
well,
there
right,
has to be parental notification
but
and permission.
okay, so am I misunderstanding? Students will not be required to provide proof of a legal name change to select a chosen or preferred name for use at school?
So for example, I think the example Katie brought up is Eleanor wanted to be called Nora. She doesn't need to bring in, this is my official legal name
Right.
change. But then if there is an official legal name change, like Dylan to Marcus, like legally changing the name, there would need to be.
Or
Well,
if she said
but I'm
like,
saying,
I
what if
want,
it's not a legal name change, but the student says, I would like to change my name. I'm just providing an example. I'm not saying that I am hopeful that this doesn't happen and that it is like a nickname kind of thing where kids should be able to advocate for themselves. I would hope, to say like, hey, I would like to go by this nickname in the class. I think that's appropriate. What I'm afraid of as a board member and a parent is the fact that there might be a student who advocates for a complete name change where a parent is not notified.
I think it's some,
I just want to state that as a board member, that is something that I am concerned about. I understand the reasoning and I also understand, the want for us to have, and I appreciate, for us to say, to state that staff that violates this policy will have
I like appreciate that because I do think that accountability matters. I just want to make sure that I state that as a board member.
I think that that's important because what the example you're naming, given the language that is currently here, the parent may or may not be notified. So let's walk it through, Dylan, to Marcus, right?
Mhm.
Saying, hey, I want to be called Marcus at school. The way this is written, parents may be notified of their student's name change if appropriate. So what you're naming would be like, I think that's worth discussing if you want to say the parents will be notified. That's a very different component, right? That if Dylan comes to the front office and says, hey, I want the paperwork, I want to change my preferred name, I want all the, of course, this isn't a legal name change, that's deeper down, like the official permanent records. We can't do that without a birth certificate. We can't, there's a lot of things there. But for the way this is currently written, you could go and say that, and the parent may be notified.
Yeah.
So that you would need to change that if you want this to be in that alignment. And our recommendation is to leave it a little gray. But I understand your point, and that is an area that the state statute is allowing districts to identify for themselves, whether it's a may, a will, a must.
Right.
I understand it as well.
Same.
And I think that my position is that it is going to create a lot of administrative work and a great burden potentially. And I think that where I sit, I trust that the professionals that are in our classrooms and in our schools are going to recognize that if this is a huge departure from who this child is, we should involve your parent. We should be talking to our school counselor. This is a larger conversation. And I don't necessarily think that it needs to be dictated down to that level in policy. I like leaving it intentionally gray because I think the people that know that student best are going to be able to make that call on who needs to be involved. But if it's like, hey, I'm Michael and I want to go by whatever my middle name is now, David, because that's my middle name. I want you to call me David from here on out. Like, I don't know that we need to go through that whole process. So I don't know.
Sorry, I just, Madam Chair, can I make a motion to add into 5 minutes because I had questions on the other policy?
Yep.
Sorry. So I did want to ask on KDE.
I think Dr. Tyler has some questions also. So
Oh.
I want to make sure we get to
Go
those.
ahead.
I was gonna say these are all first read, so we already.
Yeah.
get
Yeah,
that.
we're gonna get them back.
I did have one other question about JRA, JRC, the part that's about content and custody of student education records. And like the fourth paragraph down, it says, nothing in this policy shall prevent administrators, teachers, or staff from disclosing information derived from personal knowledge or observation and not derived from a student's educational records. And I'm a little curious about how that's stating. So if I'm a teacher and I'm not looking at the records, then I can go and talk about the child and talk about their academic performance and talk about, that's how I'm reading it, that like there's nothing that stops a teacher from talking about the student. Am I misreading that or misunderstanding that, as long as it's not the actual record of file? And I'm curious as to why that is in there.
I think it was intended to not limit the information from what's in that second paragraph. That I know it says including, but academic work complete, a level achievement, there might not there's
But when I-
this teacher counselor.
Right, I see what you're saying with that, but when I see that, it talks about student in the second paragraph saying the student educational records may contain. And it seems like this is outside. It seems to me, as I'm reading it, that fourth paragraph is outside of the student educational record. And there might be things, and maybe I'm just misreading it, but the way I'm reading is like a teacher can badmouth a student as long as it's not the educational record and not have any implications for having done so.
I hadn't read it like that, but it is helpful to know that you were thinking it might be a possibility that somebody reads it like that. So it might be worth clarifying.
I just want to,
I think this paragraph is meant to, like, especially in a community like ours, like, it's not a violation of student records or release of information if you're talking about a child that you know, as long as it's not related to this paragraph up top.
But my understanding that there was somewhere else, and I'm not sure where I read this or got this understanding, but I felt like you still had that you could still talk about a child within the school setting, even if it was on the record, because you're discussing with other teachers anyways. And I think you can use the records to have those discussions.
You can.
And so this paragraph here, it was my understanding, like that's outside of the conversations within about the child, and that I could just be going into the community and talking about this student in a way that is unbefitting to the student.
I think one thing that might clarify is as it's related to school matters or within school staff, something like that, because an example I can see is that if there's a behavior incident that happens in the classroom, for example, and it has not been entered into Infinite Campus, it's not yet an educational record. It is an incident that happened in the classroom. And so in order for a teacher or administrator to discuss it, they will have to describe what happened in the classroom, even though it's not yet part of a report in Infinite Campus. That is a personal knowledge or observation of something that happened. We can clarify that it is not intended to be like, now go badmouth kids, which you shouldn't do anyway, right? From
Right, but
a moral perspective, but to make it clear whether it's an example or it's like directly related to school matters or in conversations directly related to school matters.
right. And I understand that that is the idea behind it, but from the way it's written as in policy, it seems like if a teacher went out and did that, then they would be defended by this part of policy that said I could do that.
I think all we need to add is that language, Chief Park, of, as it pertains to school or to school and student, I don't know, some, academics. I wanted to apologize because I wasn't able to attend policy committee this last time around. I fortunately was traveling and like my brain was elsewhere. And so I just wanted to apologize because that's why I have had so many questions in at tonight's policies, but I just wanted to make sure I stated that because I know Director Kuhlenberg.
Okay, before you start, can I say, I think an easier way to clarify that language might be derived from personal knowledge or observation that occurs outside of school hours. That would limit it to interactions that occurred with the student outside of school hours or like not in their official capacity as an educator. Because I remember discussing this and the idea was like, you're gonna know something about the student because your kid plays baseball with them or, like all these things. And so I think that might be a better way to capture the concerns than related to school matters, because I think it just delineates better, like anything that you learn in your role as staff should not be shared, right? But if you see the kid at the pool on the weekend and they do whatever, that's like a different story, right? And so
Right.
I don't
I
know.
think how it's written now still doesn't change that though. It says within their capacity as an educator, because I think that's still saying within their capacity that they learned all of that. I would think it's almost outside their capacity as an educator is what we're talking then.
I'll prohibit. Something else.
Wouldn't outside their capacity as educators actually be reinforcing what you're afraid it would?
Nothing. But it
Why
says
don't we
nothing in
note
this
this?
policy.
Why don't we
Well-
note this and go through it at policy committee because
Yep.
these are on first read?
Okay,
and
thank you.
Same with, I don't know the number of questions you have left,
It's
Director Ramirez,
KDE,
but
it's KDE, so that's what I was just gonna ask if we could add KDE to policy committee again, because I do have questions on that, and I know that they're not gonna, it's not substantial, but it's important to me to make sure that I ask them, so. That's what I was looking at the time, and I just wanted to make sure that we.
yeah,
had
let's
that.
add them to policy committee.
Thank you.
Okay, so KDE, JRA coming back to policy committee.
Thank you.
I do also believe on JRA, JRC that we had significant legal input the last time that this policy was updated, and it would be smart for us to go back and see what that was, if there was anything related to this. Okay. Are we ready to move forward? The next business, oh, thank you. Well, one. The next business in order is action on a supplemental budget resolution. with Chief Chicoine. Do I have a motion to approve the supplemental budget resolution?
I move that the board approve the supplemental budget resolution as presented.
Is
I
there-
second.
Okay, we will now have 2 minutes discussion for each board member and then 5 minutes of open discussion. We'll begin with Director Ramirez.
Thank you, for this. I kind of expected us to be able to have you talk about this before we went into questions. Can you just give us a brief overview? I know you provided us with that memo, but.
I ask that we not do that in line
Oh.
with all other action items. We don't get a presentation ahead of these.
Okay, well then I don't have any questions really.
Sorry.
For some reason I thought we.
Director Tytler?
I do have a couple questions. My first question, thank you for being here, is I'm still a little confused about how this all came around and why we're doing a supplemental budget. And can you just explain a little bit why we're doing a supplemental budget?
As we were looking at the budget, there were a few items that were excluded and omitted from the initial budget that was approved by the board. And we wanted to make sure for clarity that those items were included as we were looking at those items. I was learning about them as I started the position. So I thought it was prudent for the board to know about these items and to be able to make sure they're included in our original budget, especially because the high school discretionary was a part of that. And I just want to make sure for clarity that that information is in their budget reports. Yeah.
So if I'm looking at that general allocation per student of $172, and that's where the big Glenwood Springs High School omission was from. So was all those other schools given their general allocation per student and Glenwood Springs High School was not given that?
That's correct. It was an inadvertent omission.
Okay, and then can you also state why it is that Glenwood Springs High School needs the contingency carryover funds of like $72,000 and where that number comes from and why that school versus other schools?
So every school has a contingency number. That's their carryover of what they have not spent in the past on their discretionary budgets. And so that just so happens to be what not Rifle High School, that's awesome. Glenwood Springs High School is, that's so funny. Had in their discretionary carryover, and that is one-time funding. So that is just something that, and what we do is then as we're finalizing the books for this year, then we true that number up around this time of year and then give them the actual number as we look at their actual allocations for 23-24 and what they actually spent. And then we carry that forward into 24-25. So this is what we estimate that they're going to have as a carryover.
And is there some kind of percentage that they try to carry over? And then where does that percentage come from? And still, like, I don't understand, like, why $70,000?
Do you want, okay. It really depends on the school leadership, on what they choose, to carry over and when they need the money. It's really.
And I would name that as we move forward on some of this, so generally speaking, we want schools to spend the money allocated to them in that school year for that group of students. This particular fund, the contingency fund, is a little looser in that it often comes from building rental funding, fundraisers. There's a little bit more looseness in where the revenue comes from that gives them that contingency fund, that rollover. These are sometimes, and I anticipate we might see more of this as we work through a flat student field trip fund, that schools that are looking for a big, say, junior class trip, they're going to, Glenwood Springs High School just did a day of X-Ed where some kids were rafting, some kids went to the caverns. I could see a world in which schools are looking at that contingency fund and saying, hey, the senior class is going to need more money. So we're going to let their student fees roll up from their freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, so that by senior year they have more. So there's always going to be a little bit in that. I think that kind of rollover contingency fund that feels reasonable and appropriate, but generally speaking, and this is something that I know that our former CFOs have been working on because of questions from the board of like, why that contingency fund should be not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but something more reasonable, and it should have some sort of plan attached to it.
I understand that, and that's good background information, but I'm still curious, like, how did we come up with the number 72,000? Like, what was that based on?
It was based upon what we actually anticipated that they were going to spend last year versus what they had budgeted. And anything that was unspent is going to be called a carryover or contingency item into the next fiscal year, if that makes sense. So they don't lose that discretionary funding. And so that's an actual calculation of what we anticipate is going to be moved into the next year that they are not spending, that they had available in their allocation from 23-24. Does that help?
That helps, but I'm still like, what happens if they said we anticipate we were going to spend $132,000? Would we have given $132,000? Like, why? I'm still not understanding how what the number was based on.
It's based on. So push back if I get this right.
Okay.
It's based on what they had. Like when we build the budget and we're looking at, say, their numbers in March, April.
Was based on what they had. That's all I need to hear. That answers
And
that.
then that's the number that we say, how much you spent it before June, and we're gonna roll it over.
And so somehow they had that and then they didn't have it.
Exactly. Yeah, we just didn't include it.
Okay. And then the last, Chacon, is that correct?
Chicoine, yeah.
Chicoine, thank you. Last one, Chief Chicoine. Can you explain a little bit more the charter school fees? I was trying to like understand the numbers and how the numbers came, and I was a little bit lost in how those numbers came out the way they did. And I was trying to read the spreadsheet, but I
Oh.
wasn't getting it.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so basically, with the ECEA, we found out that that was double counted.
And what is ECEA?
Early Childhood Education
Okay.
Act, right? ECEA.
Okay.
Yeah.
With ECE. Okay.
Yeah. And so anyway, so we were correcting that number. And then the other number was a administrative allocation that we're able to keep with the district, and it can be up to 5%. And when we were looking at that number, we were considering that it's probably going to be closer to a 2.5% allocation based upon what is allowable by the state for us to call administration, calculation to those charter schools. And so that is just a bit more realistic in what we thought we were going to actually charge them.
And does it make any difference whether they're running any kind of ECE program or not?
They are required to spend that funding in accordance with the grant, so that they would have to, but I don't know a lot about the ECEA funding specifically right now, but I do know that they're required to spend the monies as we would have to spend the money.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. After?
Thank you. This is pretty confusing to me, but thank you, Kenny, for asking a lot of questions I had. So I think I got the questions I had on Glenwood answered. So thanks for figuring that out and reconciling. On the charter school, can you back up on the charter school piece of this supplement? And what exactly are we approving here?
Or the what? I'm sorry.
On the page of the okay, the document is the finance update, and then page 6.
Yes.
The charter school allocation. What is is this just an annual, do we do this every year? Is this the charter school supplement that we do every year? Or was there a mistake that was made and we're correcting it now on charter schools?
Yeah, we do
Okay.
this. We do this every year, and this is a full just reconciliation that we do at least biannually to look at what the allocation should be for charter schools and what we actually pass through to them.
Mhm.
And so of course, that's going to include your total, part of your total program funding based upon their student count. It's going to include a few grants and anything and everything that is funding that needs to be transferred through, or charges that we have to charge back to them for the services that we provide them in accordance with that are in their compliance with the CDE regulations. And so that just shows you the whole formula that we use for that allocation. And the items in orange are the ones that were changed. So there
Oh, I
was-
see on page 7, on the bottom of 7.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Yes. So yeah, sorry for the confusion. I know it's a big spreadsheet, so yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it makes it more sense now that I saw the orange at the bottom. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think Director
Right.
After, you're spot on. I mean, what we're trying to catch here and be very clear with our Board of Education and with our community is that as Chief Chicoine is diving into the budget, we are finding things that were omitted or that there's errors, and we want to be really clear as we find those to get those in front of the board, get those in front of the community and say, these are things that we missed. And so, you know, I know that that's not as quite as significant of a financial number as the other ones, but it also felt important to bring it before the board that
Totally.
in
Yeah.
terms of, in the interest of transparency and clarity around the budget that we just approved, okay, we got some stuff wrong, we want to fix it.
Thanks. I agree. And are you communicating with the charter schools that they're getting an extra 2.5%?
So this will be,
Right, they're getting an extra 2.5 passed through to them directly without us taking.
That's the administrative fee.
Right.
that We're
So-
reducing.
Since we're cutting our fee in half,
Yeah.
that goes straight to them. It doesn't stay with the state, right?
So this is 24-25, and we are working with the charter schools on this, for 23-24 right now. This is just a projection or budgetary estimate for 24-25. So
Oh.
we're gonna still keep that 5% for right now until we know that actual number. But we're basing our estimate for 24-25 on what we are allowing for the state is allowing us for a charge back for 23-24. So we just want to make sure we still are holding that just in case that is reduced.
So you do it retroactively.
Correct.
And then when would they see this cash if this ends up being reconciled this way next year? Okay.
That's correct.
Mhm.
Yeah, around this time next year,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
we're just completing this 23-24 right now.
And I think I do hear in the community a bit of scuttlebutt around like the district takes 5% from us. And is that fair? And so I think it'll be important to communicate if we're not taking 5%
yeah,
at the
I
right
mean,
time.
and that's definitely going to be communicated as what happened was as Chief Chicoine and I were working through the 23-24 reconciliation and going through the state statute on that chargeback and going through the transparency components of that, it became really clear to us that 2.5% was more appropriate for what we could like in alignment with statute chargeback. And so they're going to see that change in their 23-24 reconciliation. And so we only thought it prudent to also include that in the 24-25 projections. So
Mhm.
yeah, they're aware and they've seen the calculations of this, you know, and there's been changes maybe to their favor, our favor, you know what I mean? Like that, and that's kind of what happens during the reconciliation. But I think as we were looking ahead and trying to clean things up, it felt like, you know what, let's just get this all out now and make sure we look at it all together.
Yeah, and we've been working very closely with the charter schools and actually, I think we're getting things tightened up as
Great.
far as the spreadsheets and things like that. And I think people are feeling generally pretty good about that.
Thank you. On that note, do you anticipate any other supplemental budget coming our way? Or are you still, I noticed in the intro of your memo, you said that you were still going through the complete 24-25 budget.
Yeah, what we've talked about internally is for me to do a full review of all of the administrative units and just make sure that everything in the spreadsheet is matching what is in our system, our accounting system. And that's going to take a little while to do. I think with that, adding like another layer, if you will, by administrative unit to say what the budget is supposed to be is probably another good double check for the future budget. So we'll be able to incorporate that into our next year, process with our budget to just align things, a little, just in accordance with kind of another check and balance, I guess, in the system.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna go back to Director Ramirez and give her a chance to ask questions.
Thank you. Chief Chaconi, I want to say thank you. First and foremost, it's like our first time meeting in person. I like a good memo, and so I felt really bad because I hadn't yet read your memo and I wanted to make sure I read it. I obviously, because of our board meetings and our conversations, I knew that we were going to have this come forward. And to Director After's question, I feel like your answer was yes. I feel like it's kind of something that we should at least keep on the table of like, should it become a thing where we have to? I think this board appreciates more than anything us having transparency, not only with the board and the community, but also being like maintaining the integrity of the district and making sure that our budget is clear and effective. And so I appreciate that. I know that's something we got to talk about during our finance committee. I just wanted to ask a question really quick on the charter school budget difference. We have 88,000. Is that something that is coming back to the district? It's in parentheses. And so I'm assuming that that is something we found is money that is actually ours.
The 88,000.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that is money that is coming back to us. That's correct. And that's a net number of that 2.5% versus 5% chargeback. And the monies that we found were double counted from an CEA pass through. So yeah, so that's actually in our favor.
Okay, thank you. And then the two notes that you have on the bottom, the one-time use and the additional recurring use, I'm assuming that those two add to the 497 and you just put them to as a note?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And right. And I wanted to note too, as far as transparency is one thing that we've been really wanting to work on is to understand or to gain additional understanding from the board and from the community about how we allocate funds, which I really appreciated everybody's questions here tonight. Have really helped to, encourage that goal as well. But that's why we also included that information on allocations and how the discretionary allocations work by school. So we're going to try to start to incorporate those kind of things in our future budget reports as well.
Great. I want to go to page 3. There's the section on charter schools, the CCS and the TRCS difference with ECA. I see that. And I'm assuming that that is for the 23-24 school year.
This is for 24-25.
24-25.
Yeah.
So then is the bottom, the charter schools, the projected difference, is that also for 24-25?
Yeah, all of this, this whole request is for the 24-25 budget. Mhm.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, I know that there's a little bit, because we're always a little bit in arrears with charter schools. So I understand the question is right now we're working to true up 23-24, but we're looking ahead now to make sure our budget is in line with what we believe we're going to be spending for the whole year, including what we think the true up will include.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does make sense and I appreciate it. The reason I ask is just because, we just approved this budget. And so, I am sort of in my mind, I'm trying to understand what it is that we are now approving. And I, again, appreciate that we've been thorough on it. My last question was just on the district supplement of F and R students. It says materials. Can you share what that is?
Oh, sorry. Where is that?
It's right under that charter school.
So this is the reimbursement that we will pay to schools for the fees they've waived
Got it. For this year.
for this year.
Got it.
And that we just forgot to include in the budget.
That's what's on page 8.
Yes.
And I guess I want to reiterate in terms of clarity that, because you're right, Director Ramirez, we just approved the budget. This is $500,000 of additional expenditures that were not included. And that means that what you're authorizing here is a change in our fund balance. That is a loss of $500,000. Like, it's really important that we all understand that what was a balanced budget is now based on what we found, not that. And so I think that we are appropriately at a level of, I think, heightened scrutiny of wanting to look at, and Chief Chacoin has recommended that she goes in and does kind of this review of the 24-25 budget because of some of these things that we found. I'm hoping that we're not seeing another supplemental budget, but I'll be honest that there's a lot of things that are on Chief Chacoin's plate right now that have come up that she hasn't had a chance to look through the whole thing thoroughly. And so I don't want to minimize the importance of what we're doing here and the gravity of what this means for our 24-25 budget. Is there a possibility and could there have been practices in the past where we might have said, hey, an amended budget, we might just find that we didn't hire positions and we might find $500,000 and it's okay. Maybe, but that's not where we are right now. And that's not what we see. And so it felt really, really important. And I'm really grateful for Chief Chacoin's leadership on this to say, this is big enough. This is at a point at which we need to stop. We need to pause. We need to have this exact conversation and all be very clear and aware that we are now working on a budget that has higher expenditures than we have revenue anticipated for the school year. That's what this is in a Cliff Note version.
Yeah, and I think to Director Ramirez's comment earlier about the recurring versus non-recurring costs, that 425 versus the 71. I think that just the recurring means that that's going to be something that's going to go into the next fiscal year. So that's going to impact what we're doing for our next budget as well. That's not going to go away. That's salaries. The rest of it is the contingency. Those are just carryovers of one-time dollars, and I'm not as worried about that. So just to note, that's why I always put those two as two separate buckets on the memo page.
Yeah. So I just have one additional question, and it's on the resolution, on page 3, the last sentence. So the change in use fund balance will change so it will increase by that amount. And I guess, where are those total numbers coming from in our line item budget?
So that's a great question. Thank you for that, Director Colbert. What we have with the 2,190,170 negative or use of fund balance, that was included in your original budget. And that is all the carryovers, accumulative carryovers that the district is carrying, including the contingencies for curriculum and also for the schools for discretionary monies. So those are all one-time monies, the 2,190,000. Moving it to the 2,687,000, part of that is going to be recurring deficit, and part of it is one-time use. That at X 71,000 is still one time. So then you've got that 425 we're going to have to deal with for the 25-26 budget to balance the budget.
And so do we anticipate having to move these funds from reserves to cover these costs? Is that what the
Yes.
plan will be? Okay.
Yeah, because when you're doing these, unless you have a grant or something like that, and that's the best case scenario when you have a supplemental budget is you have a grant to cover it, or you have additional students that are going to cover it with your October count or whatever, and you're going to have an increase in your total enrollment that can help cover this. If you don't have that in a supplemental budget, then you're almost forced into the use of fund balance until you can get into your projections later in the year and see where that funding could come from.
Thank you. That was my only question on these. So we'll move to 5 minutes of open discussion. If anyone has anything else.
I have 2 other questions. Following up on Director Kuhlenberg, when she was saying the money that needs to be taken out of the general fund to cover this, we're talking the
Reserves.
$500,000, not the $2.6 million, correct?
That's correct. You've already approved the 2,190,000 in the original.
And then secondly, when you talk about this reconciliation of the 23-24 budget, are we looking at possibly having to pay back 2.5% from that year also?
So when we budgeted for the charter schools in 23-24, we budgeted with a 5% admin cost. as part of the reconciliation process, we have to really articulate exactly where that 5% is going. We had not seen that happen in the past. And so when we went through the work that is required to articulate where we are appropriately using what state statute allows us to use is that 5%. The only appropriate uses we have totaled up to about 2.5. And so that is part of that. Yes, that's part of that reconciliation process. So our 23-24 charter school or 23-24 budget that was passed a year and 4 months ago had pegged that 5%. And so we withheld that 5%. And then at the end of the year, in cleaning it up, gave that money, we'll be giving that money back to the charter schools because we weren't able to justify the expense.
And we're talking still 23-24 and not 24-25. So where's that money from the 23-24 year coming from?
It was coming from the money that was withheld from the charter school PPO.
And we still have that in a fund that's separate from the general fund.
That is, well, that's a good question. Where is that? Like, how are we paying for that? That is so like, where's the reconciliation coming from?
It is, it's a general fund number that's then a transfer into the charter school fund.
So on this $500,000 that might be for 24-25 be coming out of the budget, we might be looking at another 500, another couple $100,000 coming out of the budget in addition.
It could be, we just have to reconcile our 23-24 and look at our actuals, because realistically, when you're looking at it, finalizing your numbers on, $81 million budget, you're going to have some swings here and there. It is going to affect the projection negatively though. So we're going to have to watch and monitor that. We're still working on closing our books for the 23-24, and we're still hopeful to have our audit by the end of October.
And just one last follow up on that. When we had a presentation some months ago, half a year ago, I think it might have been, where there was a business that came in and did oversight on our budget, and they said like we got a gold star ranking from that budget. Did they not look at that, or was that not part of that review that was done? And why was this company, why didn't they see that?
Our annual audit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the audit process. So what they wouldn't have seen, this 5% that was actually 2.5% when we actually did the reconciliation. That's a pretty standard practice that you, at the end of the year, kind of, close out those books with the charter schools and do this reconciliation to see were we on point or were we not. So I don't know if they were looking at that level of granularity in the audit of that charter school overhead. It just felt prudent enough to us that when we saw that happening in the 23-24 budget, that we felt like we didn't have a good reason why that number would have gone to 5% in 24-25. And so we felt like, given the fact that we were making these adjustments, we ought to do that as well. So I don't know if you have other thoughts on why the auditors might not have seen that, but it's not typically a thing that's.
Yeah, I agree with you, is that this isn't something that the auditors would really focus in on. They just want to make sure that, because if we were looking at 22-23 was the last audit. So it wasn't even based on 23-24 yet. And so our 22-23 audit, that's looking at numbers, from that year. And I believe at that year, those were all approved according to the agreements in place with the charter schools at that point in time. And I think we're starting to refine those numbers and make sure we're getting tighter with CDE. I mean, that's just part of the process of continual improvement, I think. And I think that was some of the work that was started in the last year or so, if that makes sense.
And so will will 23-24 be the last reconciliation year that we would have to look at, or are we going to be going back to 22-23 to see percentages that we did or didn't give?
We had a different charter contract in place then.
No, we're good. I mean,
Okay.
22-23 is final, and that's already been agreed upon.
Okay.
Everything's fine there. It's just a matter of, it's just refinement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any intervening motions to amend? Chief Landon, can you call the vote?
Director Titler,
Aye.
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez.
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg.
Aye. The next business in order is related. This is an action on the appropriation resolution that we just discussed for approval of additional expenditures. Do I have a motion to approve the appropriation resolution for approval of additional expenditures?
I move that the board approve the is it the beginning fund balance resolution?
It's
Approve the
the,
appropriation resolution.
it's the resolution on page 2, I believe. Memo. Is that right? Page 2.
Someone else did.
I move that the board approve the appropriation resolution for approval of additional expenditures as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
We now have 2 minutes of discussion. If we need additional time, we did just discuss this and ask questions in the last round. Director Ramirez, I'll begin with you.
Thanks. I just wanted to make a comment. I think, again, thank you for this work. I think it's important. I appreciate the level of transparency and commitment to integrity in our district. I think if we have to do this 20 more times because of whatever, I would much rather us do that and build faith in our system and in our budget as a board than not. So I, as a board member, appreciate the work. My only ask moving forward is that, you know, our commitment, Director After and myself on the budget, you know, we're here, we're ready to work and to dig in. And so, you know, I hope that we as a team are able to continue to build on this and continue to really have these conversations and bring them forward. As a board member, just my ask is, you know, I think for us, budgeting has changed so much over the last couple of years. And so as much as you can help educate us as board members, and, you know, I'm always okay with memos being longer than needed or more detailed as needed. But I think for us, it's just helpful for you as an expert in this field to be able to tell us what we need to know to make the best decision for the district. So I just wanted to make sure I stated that and again, echoed my thanks and appreciation for our commitment to integrity.
Thank you. Director Tyler.
Also, just thank you, Chief Chicoine. And do you have any time frame for us on when we might know about our budget for the reconciliation?
You mean, do you mean for 2023, 24?
For 23, 24, if we might have to pay that, how that 5.5% might go back and when that might be?
Oh, just like the final outcome for the whole books or just the charter school?
Just the charter school
Oh.
part of it.
We're looking at finalizing that after the CD 40 deadline, which is September 15th. So it's very shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Director After, do you have anything else?
Just real quick, thanks for this great work. Are you planning on using the same auditor that we've used in the past?
Yes, we are.
And is that standard practice or is there a practice to switch auditors every few years?
That's a great question.
I know there's not a lot of special auditors in the special field of education finance, but it might be something to consider.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it is something, a change in auditors is a big deal. I would say that this year we should definitely move forward with our current auditors.
Okay.
And then we can have a conversation as a finance committee and as a board on what you feel comfortable with. A lot of times, I've found that school districts and communities use the same auditors every year, as long as they're well vetted in the community, which this one is. Pretty much everybody that I'm aware of uses them. Town of Carbondale definitely uses them, Town of Basalt. I know that RE2 uses them, Parachute, us, and I believe all the school districts in the Roaring Fork Valley. So, you know, I mean, so they're pretty well used regularly. And it's just so interesting though, because it seems like a best practice to me that we do change that every once in a while. You know, it's just reality. A lot of times people end up going with the same people, but it's just, it's definitely a good question.
I think there was a conversation at one of the school finance trainings I went to on the Western Slope where they basically said, I think there's 2 auditing organizations that do this work on the Western Slope.
Okay.
You know, we can talk more about it.
I don't have anything additional, just echoing the thanks for the fine attention to detail and for the transparency in this process. I agree that if we need to do this again, we should do it again in order to get our budget where it needs to be. And I appreciate the hard work. Thank you. Are there any intervening motions to amend? Does anyone have anything else?
Okay, just checking.
Are there any intervening motions to amend? Just trying to cut it without anybody knowing. Okay, seeing none. Can you please call the vote?
Aye.
Director Ramirez,
I,
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director Titler. Aye.
All right, the next business in order is action on a beginning fund balance resolution, which was also included in the memo packet. Authorization of use of fund balance. Do I have a motion to approve the beginning fund balance resolution, author of the use of fund balance?
I can do that one.
I move.
I move that the board approve the beginning fund balance resolution, authorization of use of fund balance as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do we need to have discussion on this? Are there any intervening motions to amend? Can you please call the vote?
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director Titler,
Aye.
Director After.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next business in order is future agenda topic discussion. So Director Ramirez will have 2 minutes to make the proposal, and then we will have 5 minutes of open board discussion.
So I suggested a work session to debrief the town hall. I hosted a couple months ago at the Glenwood Springs Library. I haven't had a chance to share some of the feedback we received. Superintendent Cole was there with me, and we had, I would say, over 20 families, parents, students, alumni that were present. And so I wanted to make sure that we carved out time to sort of debrief that conversation. I think one of my pushes on the district has been obviously to include as much as possible Glenwood Springs families and community. And I think this opportunity to meet with families and to hear about their lived experiences was really important. And so I just wanted to give us the opportunity to be able to debrief about that and collaborate with VOSIS on that conversation.
I would be interested in having a work session on that and learning more. And I appreciate you all taking the time to prepare, to conduct this town hall, to engage in it, to hold that space. And
I would say ditto to that. I am interested in hearing the results. I just have a question though. I'm not understanding that the collaboration part, where does VOSIS Unidas fit in this, and were they part of that when you had your open house? Were they a sponsor of you? Were they helping you with the event? How do
Yeah.
they fit in?
Yeah, so I basically reached out to VOSIS to see if they would be willing to help supply childcare, interpretation, and other things for that event. But you know, I invited families, and our school district did end up paying for the interpreter, which thank you to the district for being a partner in that. But it was really just an opportunity for me to bring families that have reached out to me historically that with questions, concerns, comments, experiences, and Alan was there as a representative to sort of take notes and gather information from parents who might be interested in following up. Some of the parents that were there were actually here tonight. But I think for me, the hope is that, you know, as we're talking about some of these things, you know, one of the things that came up quite a bit was drug prevention. You know, I think that there's a space to have a conversation of what does this look like when it comes to community engagement? What do we as a board need to be aware of? What is the district? What is our role in that? The board, and then obviously a community partner, being that they have a parent liaison, parent, I'm sorry, I'm getting her title wrong, Katya, who is an alumni, is the parent engagement. Huh? Parent organizer. How I forgot that, I don't know. I just saw her yesterday.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for just clarifying.
That sounds good.
Okay, thanks. We're all in agreement. Okay.
Thank you so much.
So Superintendent Cole and I will work on fitting that into an upcoming agenda. Okay,
Can I speak to that? No. Okay.
we do still have an executive session this evening,
I have a comment.
so you can share it during your board update.
Okay, fine.
The next business in order is board updates and appreciations, and we'll begin with Director Tytler.
So pretty much the only board update I have is that we had a meeting with BOCES. We finally had our board meeting that had been put off over the summer. And the main topics at the board meeting was the subject of trying to find board members to fill. As it turns out right now, we only have 3 board members who are continuing on that board at this point, and only have 3 people who are voting members there. So if somebody doesn't show up, then a board meeting doesn't happen. There are 2 open seats. And so we're trying really hard to fill those 2 open seats. And it's going to be really important to have those 2 open seats filled, because in this next year, there's going to be quite a bit of changes with BOCES. We're having a new executive director. And so we're having to do a search for that and looking for the qualities and having those job interviews and searches for that. And in addition, YAMP is going to be having a new principal and director there. And so as those are the 2 major positions that drive BOCES for us, it's going to be really important that we have representation to be able to fill those positions and have enough people there to be able to continue to have meetings on a regular basis. So, and as far as, and we're doing appreciations together.
All combined.
Okay. And my appreciation this time, I want to give an appreciation to the rest of the board. Through my tenure pretty much as a board, I have been retired, haven't per se been working. And now for these last month and a half, I've been working, and I realize what a tremendous stress it is to have to try to get your job done and still do something on a volunteer basis. That in the past had been like, oh, great, I have something to do and I can devote my time there. And it's just a very different appreciation of all the extra work that goes into this from just a different point of view. And so thank you to all of you who are continuing as in your job and then taking this on in addition. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director After.
Is this where I would say something about safety?
Okay. You have an update on it. But
Or a comment.
if you have a comment on it, yes, but not a question.
I'm not gonna ask a question.
Okay.
We should add questions though. Because I
Okay,
also-
so
Sorry.
first of all, I think, I just want to give huge kudos to everyone who was involved in the, Monday, legislative tour. I got together for the first half and I'm just really impressed by our team there and of course by the folks who showed up. The media who showed up, which is great. And I just was totally proud to be part of this team in that moment. So thank you and everyone here. I also do want to say something about the safety situation on Monday. And I really appreciate the humility that you brought to your update this morning, or sorry, earlier this evening. In the superintendent's report. I think it's clear that the communications on the safety situation on Monday morning failed to live up to our own expectations. And I would just love either through a board update or even better would be communications to the community about what our standards are in that situation and a pretty accelerated timeframe for figuring that out, because it could happen again tomorrow. It could happen again a year from now. I just feel like there's an urgency to that that I don't want to underestimate. And I feel like we owe it to ourselves and to the community to get it right every time and to be in a position of making tweaks. So it's to continual improvement in crisis situations, not putting ourselves and our students and in the community in a situation where it just feels bad all around. I feel like there's a lot to be proud of on this team. And I think we should Just, I know you are still processing and reflecting on Monday. But I think an accelerated solution to whatever went wrong on Monday would be really appreciated, not just by us, but by the parents and students here. So.
Director Ramirez?
Yeah.
Sorry, were you doing appreciations?
Oh, do you have appreciations also?
Appreciation.
Oh, sorry. I appreciate all of you and all of you.
Director Ramirez?
I have a couple things. One, I want to echo the appreciation for our team for Monday's success for the Federal Relations Network. With CASB, it was really an amazing opportunity for us to be able to highlight our schools, our district, our staff, our community, our challenges, and I really appreciated the honesty from our team to share like our experience as a small rural school district who has real challenges and real wins. So thank you for that. I want to say thank you to GSES and their leaders. It was so amazing to have our students not only greet us, but take us around the school. And, you know, I think when I think of the future of our school district and our schools and our cities and our local economies and our state, I am constantly inspired by the leaders we have in our classrooms every day. And I am so incredibly grateful that our team at GSES values giving them the opportunity to like present themselves to adults as already leading in a big way. So I wanted to say thank you to them. I want to say thank you to Matt Cook at CASB and Lori Goldstein at FRN for their commitment to bringing it out to the Western Slope. It can be kind of, you know, hard sometimes to get people to come out, but the Hot Springs pool was incentivizing. So I'm very glad that we have that. I also want to say thanks to Michelle Hammond, who was on our list today as someone who is retiring. I learned about this on Monday. Michelle is somebody who works in our food and nutrition department, and for me as a parent and as a board member, has always been a strong advocate for not just students and nutrition, but also in building community. And so I just wanted to make sure I gave her a shout out because I think she has been really important to the district as a whole. And congratulations on retirement. I did want to just mention some comments. One of my comments was that I did put in the board tracker about the Google form just to make sure that we follow up on that. And I did see the response that we're in the process of creating a Google form for families and or staff to submit questions that they may have where our team will be able to respond. And so I appreciate our commitment. I feel like that is something that sort of we've talked about in the past couple months, and I appreciate that we're like still moving on it. So thank you for that. URA is meeting in October, so let you know how that goes. We'll see. I did reach out to Ben that I'll be attending the meeting on Wednesday for staff housing. Next Wednesday on staff housing for the master plan interviews. So I just want to make sure I let everyone know. So we know that there's a board member there. And then I look forward to joining those of us who are going to be able to be present at the Meadowwood ribbon cutting on Thursday, the 19th. I think this is a very exciting time for us. And I'm very excited that we'll be able to like finally have a close on that and have our families and our staff in. I think this is really huge. It's always great to go into our Meadowwood housing with like members, like on Monday, all the members that were there and who were just like, oh my God, this is so nice. Because it is really nice. It is so nice for us to be able to be providing our staff that opportunity, and something that was said during that Monday tour was that like we're building staff housing that doesn't feel like affordable housing, but it feels like home. And I really appreciated that because I do think like that's the purpose of us being able to provide our staff housing. And then last thing I'll mention is I was able to be at a conference over the last weekend with the Hun Institute on early childhood. It was the Early Childhood Leadership Summit. I was very lucky to be a Early Learning Nation Fellow. And there was a quote that I wrote down because I thought it was incredibly important. I think it speaks to what we're trying to accomplish here at the district, and our hope for the future. But the quote said, the school readiness should not be if the student is ready to attend school, but rather is your school ready for the kid? And I think, you know, in our conversations as a board and what we hope for the future and in alignment with our team, I really appreciated that and felt that that vision was true for us. So thank you.
Thanks.
I wasn't here at last board meeting, right?
For updates, Director Ramirez and I attended the DAC last night. They are in need of members, doing some rebuilding and some building out of their systems and meeting times. So if you know of anyone who wants to be further involved in kind of district level discussions around budget, around their UIP, it's a great place to be involved. It's parent and community led, and it is the District Accountability Committee. They're actively seeking new members, and they've done a lot of groundwork to be successful the last couple of years, and they're looking forward to getting back into things this year. So it was a good, productive meeting. For my appreciations, I've told other board members I'm going to be basalt focused this year because that is my director district. And for so many reasons, I want to celebrate what's happening in the basalt community. In the last week, I had the opportunity to learn more about what is going on at Basalt Middle School, and I wanted to appreciate the work that is being done there to offer Spanish language arts for all fifth graders this year. It's required changes to bell schedules and several other things, but they've made the commitment to support the kids in the continued learning of Spanish. And then also wanted to celebrate the fourth grade team at BES with their CMAS scores. They had a growth of 9.4% in math, 7.3% in ELA, and their ELA performance was at 52.2%, meeting or exceeding on the CMAS. And so just wanted to call that out. I know we spent so much time talking about data tonight, and that was a real bright spot when I was reviewing it myself. So I wanted to appreciate all that hard work because that was a lot of work for everyone involved, including the students. We have one more item on our agenda tonight, and that is an executive session. So the next business in order is an executive session pursuant to section 24-6, 4024A and E of the Colorado Revised Statutes for purposes of 1, determining positions related to the potential lease, transfer, or sale of real property located at 300 Meadowwood Drive, and 2, determining positions related to topics of negotiation and instructing negotiators concerning a potential partnership and lease agreement related to the district's outdoor education property located on Highway 82. No adoption of any proposed policy, position, resolution, rule, regulation, or formal action shall occur at this executive session. Do I have a motion to move into executive session?
I'll read the motion. Are we inviting anybody else before I read that motion?
We'll be inviting Chief Baumfach and Dr. Cole.
I move that the Board of Education move into executive session pursuant to section 24-6-4024A and E of the Colorado Revised Statutes for the purposes of 1, determining positions related to a potential lease, transfer, or sale of real property located at 300 Meadowwood Drive, and 2, determining positions related to topics of negotiations and instructing negotiators concerning a potential partnership and lease agreement related to the district's outdoor education property located on Highway 82, inviting Dr. Cole and Chief Baumfach.
Is there a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The board will now move into executive session, inviting Chief Baumfach and Dr. Cole. The time is 8:48 p.m. We will return to executive session. So no objection. This meeting will be adjourned. It is 9:31 PM. The board returns from executive session at 9:31 PM also.